And if you don't mind, county as well.
Marcia Langner, Clay County, 3255 430th Street, Ayrshire, Iowa, 50515.
Thank you.
How's that? Is that better? Okay.
And do you mind spelling your name as well? I'm sorry.
Marcia. A is my middle initial, and then Langner, Langner.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Langner, we have a handful of properties here for you, so we will just ask the questions in regards to all of them, rather than going back through the questions on each individual properties, if that's okay.
That would be great, because that's how I got my testimony ready, because I figured it would, since it's all in part of a farm, that would be an easier way to do it. So thank you for doing it that way.
I appreciate that. All right, and the staff has the relevant file. Can you describe the current use of the property and any plans you may have for a different use in the future?
My great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents purchased these parcels. 6 generations of our family have or are living here. Time will tell how many future generations would be impacted by this hazardous proposal. 5 generations of our family have or are currently farming and have been good stewards of this land. Our family has a history of knowledge and concern for the environment. My great-uncle, Earl Russell, was a Soil Conservation Commissioner for years, and later my mother, Natalie Salton, served as a Clay County Soil Conservation Commissioner. Farm operators in our family have willingly adapted to innovative practices that are beneficial for the environment. As caretakers, we do our best to keep the land productive and protected for future generations. We are here but a short time, and as landowners, we have a responsibility to leave the land in the best possible condition for future generations. Currently, these parcels are used to grow corn, soybeans, oats, alfalfa, brome grass, and CRP. Crops including barley, wheat, flax, sorghum, millet, clover, tuff grass, and a variety of other crops have been grown on this land by family members over the years. In the 1950s, my grandfather and father first started growing soybeans as a hay crop. Now my husband Chris, son David, and I grow soybeans as a commodity crop, as do a multitude of Iowa farmers. Our beautiful Iowa farmland is productive, fertile, and versatile. The markets and needs of our country change, and it is important that we can respond by growing what is needed. My son David is constantly researching new and innovative ideas for our farm. He and future generations may be growing crops that are relatively unknown today. It would be a tragedy to restrict those possibilities. My son and other young farmers already face many challenges in establishing profitable operations. Limiting their potential would be a travesty. Landowners today and in the future should be able to use their land to the best of their ability for what they choose to meet the needs of our country. Just as young farmers need to consider innovative ideas to grow viable operations, so too do all sectors of Iowa agriculture. Research and innovation have generated economic development by inventing new uses for products that farmers grow. For example, corn was initially grown for its feed value. Today, most of the corn crop is used domestically as the main energy ingredient in livestock feed and for fuel ethanol production. Yet corn is also processed into a multitude of food and industrial products, including starch, sweeteners, corn oil, and beverage or industrial alcohols. To use scare tactics, saying that corn value is going to tank if the CO2 pipelines are not constructed, would be a slap in the face to all the innovative people in the industry. Capturing CO2 from ethanol plants, combining it with hydrogen, and turning it into green methanol is just one alternative the industry has in its arsenal. In addition to being able to grow whatever commodity crops we choose, we should also be able to grow trees for fruit, wood, nuts, or windbreaks. We should have the option and right as landowners to plant trees anywhere on the land we own. As landowners, we have the right and ability to build above and below ground anywhere on our property. We should have the opportunity to construct wind or solar farms. The proposed pipeline would take away that right. The hazardous pipeline, as proposed, could limit future homes, livestock facilities, machine sheds, or other building expansions, and limit the versatility of our farming and future farming operations. The proposed hazardous pipeline would limit water quality wetland projects and additional tile projects. As a United States soldier, my grandfather fought in World War II to protect our freedoms. He returned home to his family and farm after being exposed to chemical agents on the battlefield. Yet he never wavered from the desire to protect our Constitution and freedoms. My brother served in the Iowa National Guard during and following the Vietnam era, and my nephew served as a Marine in Afghanistan. All our military men and women have served, so we as United States citizens can enjoy freedoms and protections outlined in the Constitution, including property rights. Considering the tremendous changes over the last 5 generations, who knows what the next 5 generations will see? Keeping the land intact without private entities encroaching upon it is a fundamental desire and right.
What is fun? There's nothing better to do fun.
Can you provide a general description of the land, and is any of the following on your property? And if so, where are they located? And we'll just kind of walk through them.
Sure.
Buildings or structures?
Okay, on OSS Ag, purchase parcel HCL 066 in 1990. At that same time, my brother and sister-in-law purchased 80 acres to the east. In 2016, more than 20,000 feet of tile work was completed on the 160-acre tract. A portion of the land proposed to be used by the hazardous CO2 pipeline is currently enrolled in CRP wetland. So that's tract HCL 006. My mother, Natalie F. Salton, purchased HCL 043 in 1989. This particular piece of land had once been owned by my great-grandfather, Alexander Murray Salton. When he died in 1921, the land became my great-grandmother's along with her 3 children. In the midst of the Great Depression, the farm had to be sold in 1933. My parents waited for years for this land to become available to purchase. My father knew how hard it was on previous generations to lose this land and wanted to make it part of our family legacy once again. Non-farmers may not realize how land becomes a valued part of not only a farmer's family history and legacy, but hope for the future as well. This parcel has private tile lines as well as 3 county tile lines. The county tile lines range from 6 to 24-inch diameter and are in the path of the proposed hazardous pipeline. This parcel was also identified by the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council, Iowa State University, and drainage engineers as a potential water quality wetlands project. The water quality project includes a basin which would be directly above the proposed hazardous pipeline. Salton Family Trust dated November 9th, 2004 parcels HCL 001, HCL 042, HCL 097 were purchased by W.A. and Ida Salton in 1949. My grandfather, W.A. Salton, was raised in the house connected to this land. My parents lived in the house and raised 6 children here. My husband and I raised our 2 sons here and continue to reside in the house. Our home and building site would be less than a half a mile from the proposed hazardous pipeline. The land has private tile lines, some of which were dug by hand by previous family members. Tile projects have been completed on this land over the years, including more than 10,000 feet laid in 2019. Livestock has always been part of our family farming operation. Today we use this land for our cattle operation, grazing corn stalks, overwintering cattle. Cattle would be grazing directly over the path of the proposed hazardous pipeline. Chris N. Langner and Marcia N. Langner Revocable Trust, HCL 012, HCL 072 land was purchased by my parents, Sandy and Natalie Salton. They transferred ownership of the 80 acres to my brother, Aaron Salton, sister Susan Salton Irwin, and me. This land has private tile lines implemented over the years with more than 10,000 feet of tile laid in 2019. The parcels HCL 012, HCL 072 are directly to the north of the base of our current cattle operation. A permanent 240-foot building is too close for comfort from the proposed hazardous pipeline. It is difficult to tell from the summit map exactly how close the building would actually be to the proposed hazardous pipeline. I don't know the accuracy of the map legend, but it appears to me to be within 500 feet. This building is currently used as a calving barn from late winter to spring. Spring to summer, it is used to house replacement heifers. Wean calves are housed in the building late summer through winter, and then the cycle continues. The building houses cattle throughout the year. HCL 012 has a grove of trees for windbreak. The cattle utilize the ground to the south of the trees in the spring. This parcel is used for grazing corn stalks in the fall or rye in the spring, depending on the current crop rotation. HCL 072 is used for pregnant cows and new cow-calf pairs. It is also used for crops, haying, and grazing. Both parcels utilized by livestock. There is no water source on these 2 parcels. The only way for the cattle to reach water would be for them to travel directly over the path of the proposed hazardous pipeline. Our son David also owns cattle and has talked of expanding the livestock operation. As owner of the property, we should have the right to build additional structures. The hazardous pipeline would interfere with such an expansion.
Any stream or body of water or other noteworthy terrain features?
There are no streams on these parcels. There are waterways on various parcels, and CRP wetland is part of the OSSA parcel.
Timber or forest?
There is timber on the last one, HCL 012, does have some trees.
Are there any current easements held by a third party?
No.
Any other feature or condition that may not be readily apparent and that might affect or be affected by the proposed line?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
any other feature or condition that may not be readily apparent to us or staff that you want to make us aware of?
Not at this time.
Okay. And I think you already have articulated this well, so if you feel so inclined, you can do it again. Describe any specific concern you may have and any recommendation you may have for the board to address your concerns.
Thank you. A major concern is for the consideration of using eminent domain for private enterprise. Eminent domain is intended for government projects that are undeniably for the public good. Eminent domain practices should not apply to projects with the primary benefit being for private entities. Extensive time and money have already been spent to hold on to our property rights. If this use of eminent domain is allowed, how much more time and money must farmers annually locate to combat future infringements on landowner rights? Our family does not have unlimited resources. Over time, how much money and or legal fees and economic loss must we bear? Consideration needs to be given for added stress and mental health of landowners. Landowners' physical and mental health is greatly affected by the need to protect what they and past generations have garnered through lifetimes of hard work. Sleepless nights and days spent devoted to upholding property rights are taking a toll throughout Iowa. My husband and I have experienced this firsthand. Landowners not in the path of the current proposed hazardous CO2 pipeline also need to take up the cause to protect landowner rights. If a private company could be given the ability to use eminent domain for hazardous waste projects such as this, what is to prevent the next multitude of projects for generations to come? Insurance is also a concern. My agent passed along a letter from Nationwide Insurance regarding insurance related to carbon dioxide pipeline across Iowa. Farmers' insurance is limited to regular agricultural related claims. It does not cover pipeline issues. My family and my concerns generated many questions. How far apart are the shutoff valves for the proposed pipeline to be placed? Who is proposed to be responsible for shutting them off, and how soon would this happen when a leak or problem occurs? What timeline would be proposed to have repairs completed and by whom? With 2,500 pounds of pressure, we suspect it would be highly probable that other leaks would result when a shutoff valve is activated, as well as from use of the pipeline over time. A depth of 48 inches may not be sufficient for controlling high-pressure liquid. The natural cycle of freezing and thawing would also be disrupted by this proposed hazardous pipeline. Compaction issues from construction would be magnified by the limited natural freeze and thaw cycle. A 2021 Iowa State University study of pipeline construction reaffirms that productivity of the cropland can be negatively affected by pipeline construction. We also have concerns with how this proposed hazardous pipeline would affect livestock operations. Timing of the proposed construction could have a critical effect on cattle operations. If construction were to take place in the spring on land that was being used for calving, utter chaos would ensue. What does this proposal suggest for relocating cattle to a safer location for calving? What if alternative land is needed to relocate the herd during this critical time period? Who would find the alternate land? Who would bear the economic burden of transporting, renting, and relocating the animals? How could a convenient alternative location be found that would meet the needs of producers to check cattle throughout the day and nights? If the proposed hazardous pipeline was to be constructed during the summer on land that was designated for grazing, and construction was between where the cattle drink water and the fields that they graze, how would the cattle get to the water supply? Who would be responsible for ensuring that the cattle have sufficient water? If construction were to take place in the fall and winter, where cattle were grazing corn stalks, and again, the water supply was between the field and the water source, who would be responsible for supplying the cattle with fresh, unfrozen water? How many times would this proposed project allow outsiders to enter private property without notification? This process already has shown disrespect for landowner rights by allowing surveyors to enter unannounced. We did receive a letter from Summit stating they would be surveying our property, and they had the legal right to enter the property. I then called the 855-950-6350 phone number included in the letter to ask that we be notified before entry, as it was calving season. The gentleman assured me we would be notified prior to the survey. However, my husband came upon a survey crew after noticing the cattle had been spooked. We had not been notified of their arrival. He talked to the crew, who admitted noticing the cattle became jumpy when the cows spotted them. Twice, we asked Summit personnel to contact us before surveying land that was being used for cows to calve and as a nursery for cow-calf pairs. They did not notify us, and twice we asked them to leave as we were concerned strangers would upset the new mothers. Summit has also shown disregard for its employees and contracted workers by having them enter fields which have been sprayed with chemicals. Many chemicals used in agriculture have a re-entry period for safety reasons. My husband talked to a survey crew bodyguard that was parked on the gravel road and asked him if a survey crew was in the field. He told my husband yes, and that they had every right to be there. My husband then told him, although they may have a right to be there, they may not want to be in the field as it had just been recently sprayed. If Summit doesn't contact the farmers, how do they know it's safe for personnel to be on the land? What if pipeline personnel are in the field unknown to the operator and the field is sprayed by an airplane or a drone? A person walking in the field may not get out before being sprayed. Who would be liable, according to this proposal? What would the proposed procedure be for individuals who may get sprayed, who without notice entered the property? What would the proposed procedure be for individuals who entered private property without notice and find themselves in danger due to livestock's natural flight or fight response to unfamiliar trespassers? If landowner rights are disregarded using an eminent domain, would Summit be financially responsible for providing water source and fencing for cattle? If necessary livestock processes become disrupted by this proposed pipeline, who would withstand the economic loss? We are concerned the proposed hazardous CO2 pipeline would result in decrease in land valuation for our family and future generations. Implication for groundwater contamination and sinkhole formation are also concerns. With this proposed project, who would make the determination if repair or replacement was needed for tile, terrace, or irrigation system when the damage appears after the completion of construction or during the following growing season or subsequent growing seasons? How would that determination be made? What time frame for repairs or replacement does this proposal set forth for completion? Would there be an independent oversight to determine compliance? How would reasonable costs be determined, and what would arbitration be available? What professional tiler is going to do all the necessary repairs to tiles, terraces, and irrigation system? It's hard enough to get professional tilers to complete jobs on agricultural land that does not contain pipelines. For example, we have had to wait 3 years for tile repair projects to be completed. We waited until the professional tiler had equipment in the area for other jobs so that it was economically feasible for repairs to be finished. It is not uncommon to have to wait a long time for tile repair work in this area. Who would want to even come near the pipeline to complete the tile work? It would be more dangerous around the compressed CO2. The project would take longer because of the amount of regulation that is bound to be part of the job. It will take longer because of coordination between multiple parties involved: tilers, landowners, operators, government officials, whatever representative there are for whoever owns the pipeline at the time of the job. Tile work is typically completed in the spring after ground thaws and before planting, or in the fall after harvest and before the ground freezes. That time frame is often short. A professional tiler has the opportunity to take a job where they can pattern tile an 80-acre field or contract to fix pipeline troubles. Which do you think they will select? What would happen to the tile repairs that take years to complete? Who would pay for the economic loss of damaged tile caused by this proposed hazardous pipeline project? How would this proposed hazardous pipeline affect future tile projects? Would any professional tiler want to even take on such a project? Landowners with property adjacent to the proposed pipeline have a high probability of being affected by Summit's proposed project. With an extensive number of miles of pipeline proposed, it would be naive to believe that neighboring landowners would not experience issues on their property. Who would be financially liable for fixing problems or making necessary repairs to adjacent land? It's also terrifying to know this proposed hazardous pipeline project would allow Summit Carbon Solutions to turn around and sell a signed appropriation, mortgage, or lease the easement agreements. No matter who bought the easement agreements from Summit, original landowners would be stuck forever. Who knows who the future owners of the easements could be? Would they be conscientious owners or scoundrels?
Do you recommend an alternate route for the proposed line? And if so, describe that route and its advantages or disadvantages.
We would not suggest the pipeline be placed on anyone else's farm. As stated previously, eminent domain is not intended for private endeavors to make money. If the pipeline is truly safe, one family member suggested placing the pipeline between the existing medians of the interstate highway system. Consider alternatives to the pipeline concept, encouraging more no-till or minimum tillage, which are confirmed agricultural practices, would be more effective in reducing the release of CO2. Another alternative would be to capture CO2 at the source and create products such as CO2 pellets that could be sold as useful merchandise. Or using the technology that captures CO2 at the source, combine it with hydrogen and turn it into green methanol. Research alternative uses for CO2 and for ways to reduce CO2 emissions. Incentives for planting trees would also reduce CO2.
Questions for the witness from the parties?
I have just a little bit more because you had a fifth question, so I'm just going to elaborate. That fifth question elaborated on any concerns? Thank you. My husband and I met with a Summit land agent early in the process to learn more about the project and gather initial information to share with my siblings and mother. My brother and I have legal power of attorney for my mother to assist her with her finances. During this meeting, we implored the agent not to contact my mother, who is 93 and lives in a community care center assisted living facility. She did not need this outside stress, and we knew she would become agitated. He assured me she would not be contacted. However, Later, I found out she had been harassed by various Summit representatives on multiple occasions. The Summit representatives have used unethical tactics. They have continuously disrupted our workday, even after being repeatedly told we were not interested in signing these easement agreements. Another Summit land agent later presented me with a verbal offer that was larger than the previous offer. I told her we were not in negotiations, but if she gave me an offer in writing, I would share it with my family. She did not provide the higher offer in writing. Recently, a Summit land agent stopped at my home again. I told her we were not interested in hearing any more from Summit and asked her not to stop again. A week later, she stopped at my brother's house and stated the easement agreement offer was reduced at a time when we knew other offers were increasing. Why would a project with a lifespan of 20 to 25 years need to have an easement that would last forever? I have heard that the maximum number of years that the current proposed pipeline could deposit CO2 in the designated area is for only 20 years. Is that correct? I have heard the proposed pipes used for this project have a 20 to 25 year life expectancy. Is that correct? Have independent professional engineers approved the pipe and material Summit is proposing to use for this hazardous CO2 project? I've heard that North Dakota denied Summit's permit and therefore the proposed Summit pipeline would be to nowhere. Is that correct? Why is Iowa even considering this pipeline when better alternatives are available? Safety is a huge concern. Have comprehensive independent safety studies been conducted? If so, by whom and what were the results? Have they been made part of the public record? If there is a leak, or worse, an explosive release of CO2, who is equipped to respond? In this proposed project, would Summit be responsible to train first responders along the route to be prepared for such an emergency? If temporary access roads are removed following construction completion, how would emergency crews get to the hazardous pipeline? More documented clarification is needed. In this proposal, would the pipeline be able to transport other hazardous waste besides pressurized CO2? What alternate ways could the permanent easement be used in the future? Is there any legal limit in this proposal as how the easements could be used? What effect would the proposed hazardous pipeline have on neighbors adjacent to the proposed hazardous pipeline? The home and acreage, which my son Mark owns, is within a quarter mile of the proposed hazardous pipeline. He does not own the property where the hazard is proposed, so he would have no recourse other than to move his wife and 2 young children. This would result in the loss of their established home, which they purchased from his grandmother. In addition to family members or livestock in harm's way, adjacent neighbors may also find economic loss and devaluation of their property. There are way too many unanswered questions and unknown consequences for landowners and homeowners anywhere in the vicinity of this proposed hazardous CO2 pipeline. Who truly would be the greatest financial beneficiary of this hazardous CO2 pipeline project? Would Summit gain tax dollars for construction of the project? Would Summit gain financially for selling tax credits? What would prevent Summit from turning around and selling the CO2 to oil companies to continue fracking in North Dakota? It appears to me Summit, a privately held company, would gain off the backs of landowners and out of taxpayer pockets. Thank you for listening to our concerns. We look forward to your decision to affirm the rights of landowners and protect all Iowans from the misuse of eminent domain power.
Thank you. Mr. Whipple? Mr. Whipple with the counties.
Yeah, Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead and restate your name and your client.
My name is Timothy Whipple, and I represent 7 different counties. You probably can't see them.
No, I can't.
I just wanted to follow up on a couple strains of your testimony, and not specific to any single parcel, but we're looking on the screen there at part of the route and a residence.
That is where our cattle operation, if you look at the white large building on the bottom of the screen in the green area, that's our 240-foot cattle building.
Okay. Do you know how close it comes to the cattle building?
My guess from the maps we had was 500 feet.
500 feet. Okay, thank you.
That is where my husband and I first lived, but there's no longer a house there. So
I understand. I think a few of my childhood homes are gone now. Did you ask Summit to change that route to be farther away from the cattle operation?
we did not, because we really don't believe in this pipeline. So we did not ask them to renegotiate it and put it on somebody else's property or to move it.
Is it fair to say that one of your concerns is that you wouldn't want to see it moved closer to your neighbors?
We believe there are a lot of safety aspects, so we're not only concerned with it for our own safety and for future generations, but the safety of Iowans in general.
But you are concerned about the proximity to your residence or other residences and to the occupied structures.
We are concerned about the proximity to residents, but we're also concerned about the proximity to cattle. We would have cattle grazing directly over that. And as I stated, cattle use almost all of our property at one time or another, depending what time of the year it is. We do have cattle using that property.
So at this operation here or at other places along the line where it crosses your property, about how far are you from the nearest town at that location?
We are like 5.5 miles from Ayrshire, 5.5 miles from Gillette, which are both very, very small towns. Spencer is probably the largest town we are next to, and that's about 20 miles away.
Is that where the nearest hospital is?
Yes, Spencer would be the nearest hospital.
And that's 20 miles?
Yes.
About how long does that take to drive, would you say?
Well, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. And you are concerned, are you not, about the ability to sell this land to others with an easement attached?
We do think that a hazardous CO2 pipeline would devalue the land. We are concerned about that.
Do you also think it would make it harder to find a buyer?
Yes, we do believe it would be harder to find a buyer, especially for like my son, who doesn't own the land that the pipeline is going through, but only lives a quarter mile from that pipeline. If he didn't want to live that close, the only option he would have would be to move. And if he were to move, I doubt he would be able to generate as much as a acreage would be that didn't have a pipeline close to it.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Greenhagen with Iowa Farm Bureau and then OCA.
I'll try to move so I can see. Hi, my name is Chris Greenhagen, and I'm representing the Iowa Farm Bureau. And I have some questions just to clarify some of your opening statements,
Sure.
just to start with. You had mentioned, when you were asked about structures, are there any structures on any of the properties? There's 7 properties listed that you're testifying regarding.
There are currently no buildings, if that's what you're.
Yes, are there any
If
buildings?
that's what you're stating, there's no buildings on any of the properties, but we do have, farmstead acreages with buildings close to the proposed pipeline.
Thank you. And so then is the closest one then your cattle home base there that you described?
The cattle home base is the closest, and then if you look to the left across the section, that is where my husband and I live. We're too far, right on the edge. So that'd be like a half a mile
The
away.
next gravel road intersection, T intersection?
No, that is actually a long lane to my cousin's house. That's to the north, but our farmstead is there, and then we do have livestock on that property as well.
And you mentioned that your cattle use all of those parcels. Are there some of the parcels that are in pasture and some that are in row crop?
Yes, we do have some that are in pasture, some that are in row crop, but as I stated earlier, my family has always believed in doing the best for our land as we could. Part of that, we believe it's important to add alfalfa to our crop rotation. And so where we add alfalfa from time to time, then later that would become grazing. So it
So you
does
rotate-
change. Yes,
rotate
we
the
do.
land that you use for
Yes, we do
pasture.
believe in crop rotation and alfalfa being part of that, pasture being part of that.
And so how often would land, maybe that's in row crop now, how often does that then rotate into pasture?
It would depend on the parcel, because part of that also depends on the closeness to a water supply source. So those that have a closer water supply source would have alfalfa on it. So right now, we have an alfalfa parcel right close to our house. And then later, that may become grazing land, or we may put it back into crop rotation, just depending on how we decide it works best for our operation at the time. But our alfalfa, we typically leave for about 7 years. But it can vary, of course, if the alfalfa would happen to winter kill, you're not gonna leave it, you're gonna do something different. And so it does vary.
So of the parcels that are the subject of the exhibit H's, are any of those currently in pasture?
Yes, on where we have our hoop building to
Is
the,
that 72 then?
yes,
CL-072, the one above the cattle,
the one next to it.
the one next to it, okay.
Not that one with the cursor, but the one next to it has pasture on it right now. But it's kind of hard to tell.
So that one,
There's a darker green, and then a lighter green, and then the red. Okay, the darker green and the lighter green are both, the lighter green was pasture along with the red above it. But now this year, the darker green, the lighter green are all in soybeans, along with a little bit of where it's red. So that does change as well. But there is pasture and haying ground to the north of that right now.
so the parcel to the right, if you're looking at the aerial photo here, that is CL-066, I think if I have it.
No, that's OSS Ag. So that's the one that has,
Yes, that one's owned by OSSA.
yeah, and that's not on this one. That's not on this.
Okay,
It's clear to the west, so you can't see it here. It's clear to the west. It's a 2-mile section.
okay,
So
well,
you
let's
gotta
go
go
back to,
clear to the west.
okay, let's go back to the parcel I had the wrong number then. Let's
Okay.
go back to the one, to the right of your cattle home base there.
Right,
Okay, that one's in pasture currently?
part of it, yes.
Sounds right.
And there is no water source on that. We don't have a well or anything up there, so the cattle that are on that, we have a lane that they go down, and then they go to the cattle. They go down by the hoop barn where we have water for them. So the only way to get water is they have to come through that.
So, if the permit is granted and they do construct, would you want fencing along the area of the easement so that you would still have, the cattle would still have access to the rest of the parcel?
We understand that, from what I've read, that Summit would provide fencing. Our bigger concern is, what about the water? I mean, we can't have, yeah, sure, you can put fence up, but what good's that gonna do if the cattle don't have any water? And grazing that is only in the summertime. Other times of the years, we have the cattle elsewhere. And so in the wintertime, if there was, excuse me.
I just wanted you to know that there is a pointer here that you can use.
Okay, thank you. Pointer, that's handy.
Yeah, my.
No. So,
And so how do you move the cattle between the parcels then?
depending where we move them, a lot of times, if we're moving them from what we consider the home place where we live to the cattle farm where it's pictured there, we would chase them across our own land, and then it's just across the road. We have gates, so we chase them across the road. When we take them to other pastures in the summertime, we haul them. We have
a trailer?
Yeah, we haul them with a trailer. And depending on where we are grazing corn stalks, we would typically chase them across our land and then to where they need to graze corn stalks. Or in the spring when we have them grazing rye, we would chase them, but sometimes we haul them, just depending on where we're taking them.
I believe you mentioned that there's CRP on the OSS Ag property.
Yes, there is.
Are there any other properties that are subject to the Exhibit H on which there's CRP?
There is not, just the OSS Ag
Just that.
property has some CRP wetlands and some crop.
And so if the permit was granted and there was construction that took place, if FSA decided that you were in violation of your CRP contract, would you want Summit to make that right?
Of course.
I'm gonna back up a little bit, I have some other questions as well. Did you submit any comments or objections in the docket?
I did early on send in an objection, and I believe my siblings, some of them have as well.
I think I found one by Aaron.
That would be my brother.
Okay. But there were other comments in the record other than his.
I sent one, I can't remember the date of it, but I did send one, and my sister Susan Irwin sent one as well. I thought my sister Levon Anderson sent one. That was what she had told me. She was sending one, so.
I don't think I looked for an Anderson, so.
Okay.
Might be why.
Well, in a lot of the Summit things, they have her as Susan Salton instead of Susan Irwin, and Levon Anderson Salton instead of Levon Anderson. And my other sister is Marilyn Hawkins instead of Marilyn Salton.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that there's drainage tile. on
There
several
is
of these.
drainage tile. Yes.
Do all of the parcels have drainage tile?
Yes.
And is it pattern tiled or or is it just tiling out the wetter areas in the field?
The parcels, depending on the parcel, some have more tile than other. None of it was done, so a field wasn't completely pattern tiled at a time. But there, like where we lived, the home place, that had quite a bit of tile put in it, and the OSS Ag farm had quite a bit of tile put in it. But neither are like the 50-foot or 60-foot pattern tiles. And some of the tile we have maps for, and some of it we don't, because it was put in over multiple generations, over multiple years.
Would you be willing to share your tile map with Summit if the permit was granted so that they could make sure that that tile was repaired?
I do think that it would be important to share as much of that information as we could if this were to go forth, although I'm hoping it doesn't get that far.
Understand. So if construction did take place and you discovered 5 years from now that there was some, because we're having dry weather, and that some tile wasn't repaired and you didn't learn about it for some time, would your expectation be that someone would still come in and fix that tile?
Yes.
Are your farms enrolled in any federal farm programs?
We
We talked about CRP already.
Yeah, we are enrolled in farm, the regular farm programs, commodity programs.
Do you have any HEL ground, highly erodible land ground amongst those parcels?
Not of these parcels, no.
Are any of the farms enrolled in CSP?
No.
And that's the Conservation Security Program.
No.
Just for court reporter, for the acronyms. Any other special cost share farm programs that you maybe that the farms may be enrolled in?
No, but we do have the one farm that's listed just as my mother's, that was identified as a proposed wetland. The county supervisor sent us a letter, and I have that in my testimony about.
Could you clarify which parcel that was? I know you had talked about it.
I have to find the numbers, since the numbers of the HCLs are not the same as the numbers of the parcels from the county. Okay. HCL 043, that's the one that also has a county tile line going through it. And it was the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council, Iowa State University, and drainage engineers that have this as a proposed wetland project. And they, when we met with them as a larger group, they had identified 25 of these in Clay County and said that they were over number of years going to try to see if they could implement some of these. At the time, we did not sign up to have this one implemented. There was a variety of reasons why we didn't at the time, but they said we could in the future if we chose to. Situations change, and that was something that we thought we might look into in the future, but it would be, the basin would be right over. The basin would be right over the pipeline here that was proposed for the wetland project. And I do have a copy of their map if anybody would like it.
And that wetland project would be to help reduce nutrients in the stormwater runoff that's coming up.
That was the idea behind it. That's what we were told, that would be what that would be for. And it also affected the parcel next to it that is in the Salton Family Trust.
From the water that gets gathered from the berm that they put up.
Correct. And we also farm the land underneath it, which is my aunt's, and we have the farm beside it and the farm on the other side of it, and all of those would be affected by that wetland project. So it's not just where that goes through.
Are there any other water or soil conservation structures on any of the properties? Like waterways, terraces?
There are some waterways, no terraces.
In the waterways, I assume we're able to see on the aerial photos. If the red wasn't there, it'd be my.
It doesn't really show them very well, I don't think.
So other than grassed waterways, there are no other soil or water conservation structures that
Correct.
are currently there?
Correct.
Are there any designated wetlands from NRCS on any of the properties?
There's the CRP wetlands on the OSSA.
So it'd be WRP, is that the program that you'd be, the Wetlands Reserve Program?
Right.
And that is on the OSS property?
Yes, that's on the OSSA property. I believe that's the 0661.
Have there been any other designated wetlands or farmed wetlands in any of the other properties?
No, there has not.
So for these next questions, we're going to assume that the permit is granted, and this is for purposes of protecting some of the things you may want to do with the property, okay, in the future. Would you want to be able to access that property for that 2-year construction period if they're not actively constructing?
Yes.
In your easement, would you want the easement to be as specifically identified on your Exhibit H, or would you like them to be allowed to move the pipeline?
I think it would be critical to know exactly where it's going to go, because how are you going to operate otherwise? I mean, you're trying to run a farming operation and not know where it's going. That to me would be ludicrous.
If the board grants the permit, would you be willing to consider signing an easement if it was under the same terms and conditions it's been offering to other landowners? Instead of going, if the permit is granted, would you be interested in negotiating an easement at that point rather than going to eminent domain?
Well, that's hard to answer. It's hard to answer because on principle, we really do not believe this project is a benefit. So it would be hard to then go to negotiations. But yet it would be important if you had to do it. I think it'd be important to at least have a seat at the table so you knew what was going on.
So would you like the opportunity to sign an easement so you can make that choice?
Yes, if we were forced to, we would want to be at the table.
If there are crop yield reductions in the farms that you have in crop for 3, 5 years, 10 years out, would you want to be compensated for those crop yield reductions?
We would not only want to, we would expect to be. I think that would only be fair.
And then would you, do you know what size pipe Summit is looking at putting into the easement area?
No,
Would you want that to be limited to the size pipe that they're proposing?
yes,
Would you want them to be able to enlarge that pipe at a later date?
no,
And would you like Summit to consult with you before it changed the grade of the land?
definitely.
That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
My name is John Long. I'm an attorney with the Office of Consumer Advocate. You've told us that you have a livestock operation. If you told us this and I missed it, I apologize. How large is your livestock operation?
My husband Chris, I, and my son David, we have a livestock operation, a cow-calf operation combined. And we have 200 cows, 200 calves. We have replacement heifers, and then we have a few feeders.
Thank you. And is it one of your concerns about the proposed line that if there were an incident, a release of gas?
We
Yes.
don't know what fucking noise is. Can't do with you guys right now.
And do you have, if your livestock were harmed or damaged, would this be a significant financial burden to your family and your business?
Yes, most definitely, and as well as a financial burden, it would be a mental burden as well. I don't know if you're familiar with raising livestock or not, but you do get attached to your animals, and you always believe that yours are the best. And I have some. My husband keeps telling me I need to quit naming them.
You're making me feel guilty for my lunch. So, do you have any concerns about how easily or quickly you could recover financial damages if there were an incident that damaged your livestock or other property?
I hate to even think about it. It would be devastating.
I'm going to ask something similar to what Ms. Grunhagen was asking about. Do you understand that if the board were to approve the project and grant eminent domain over your property, that typically the way you would be compensated would be to have to go to the county compensation commission?
I'm not aware of how that process would work.
What I would ask is, would you, if, and I understand you don't want this at all, but if it came to it, would you rather have the ability to take the last best financial offer that Summit made to compensate for the easement, rather than taking your chances with the amount that the county compensation commission might award you?
Objection irrelevant.
Rephrase your question, Mr. Long. Or restate your question.
Would you prefer to have the choice of taking the last financial offer of compensation for the easement from Summit if it came to it, rather than being limited to having to go to the county compensation commission and take the amount of compensation that they award you, which may be less?
Same objection. It's, yeah,
Can you
form
expand on that?
Well, yeah, what are we doing here that has anything to do with whether or not she'd like to take some last phantom offer from Summit versus going to some compensation board?
May I respond?
Yeah.
This was addressed in the Dakota Access case, and it's legally relevant to this case because it could be conditions or terms that we and perhaps other parties would ask for on the order.
Okay, thank you. Noted, overruled. Go ahead,
Fine.
Mr. No, it's okay. But do you want to add?
I was just going to say that I objected to the form of the question because Mr. Long suggested, or maybe even stated, that Ms. Langner would get less than a compensation more than from an offer from Summit. That's not necessarily true. We don't know what she would get.
Thank you.
Then I'll rephrase the question one more time.
Thank you. But I also want to add, Ms. Langer, if you're not comfortable answering the question or don't want to answer the question, you may choose to not answer the question. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Long.
Would you prefer to have the choice to accept the last financial terms that the company offered rather than being forced to accept whatever the compensation commission awarded, whatever that may be?
Same objections.
Overruled. Go on.
Of course, we would want the most that we could possibly get. But I think also we would want to be in on the terms of what was being proposed. For example, again, with our cattle operation, there's a lot of unanswered questions of fencing and who's going to pay for it, water sources, who's going to pay for it, transport of cattle, all sorts of things that I don't know if the compensation board or whatever could negotiate that or not. I don't know.
Sorry, we can't provide you.
Oh. Let's just hope it doesn't get that far.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
There are some buildings on your property, or at least near the parcels that are impacted. And I wanted to look at the map and get a sense of what those buildings are and where they are. There's one toward the upper left-hand corner. Is that your home place? Yes.
Yeah. This is where my husband and I live, and that's that homestead is where my great-grandfather lived, and my grandfather and my parents, and now us.
And then there's a vertical white line toward the right of the map. Is that the county road?
This right here is
Yeah.
a county road?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And it looks like the pipeline would cross that county road.
Yes.
Do you know how Summit intends to get across that county road?
No.
And then just to the south of there, that's your cattle operation?
That is our cattle operation.
Okay. Can you describe what those buildings are there?
Sure. This is our 240-foot cattle building. And then there are two silos here. There's a Morton building structure here. We do use that sometimes as a commodity shed. Sometimes during calving, we have cattle in there as well. The 240-foot building is not large enough for all of our cattle during calving season, so we do rotate them around. We use this pasture in the spring for cattle as well, this pasture in the spring for cattle, this pasture in the spring for cattle. And as I said, depending on the time of year, all of it at one time or another has cattle on it. Just depends on what time of year that would be.
And so you graze your cattle and do not feed them in the building, correct?
In the summertime, the cattle are on pasture. They're here. They're at the home place. We have multiple pastures that we rent as well away from these buildings. But there is always that building is always utilized for some cattle. So there's always, throughout the year, whether it be cow-calf pairs, replacement heifers. Right now, we have just started weaning calves, so we have newly weaned calves in there. Yeah, so it just depends on the time of the year, what process of the operation that we're in, and where the cattle are at.
And then do you finish the cattle and then send them to the slaughterhouse?
We raise our calves to. Sometimes we raise them to 500 pounds. Sometimes we go 700 pounds, and sometimes, they can 800 or 900 pounds. It just depends on the market, but we sell them as feeders.
Okay, so you sell them to another operator who then finishes them to send them to the slaughterhouse?
Correct. We only have a few that we feed out to finish. Most of them we have the cow-calf operation and then sell them as feeder calves.
Now, if we can raise the map up a ways, there's a building or something there, just south of your cattle operation. What is that?
That is our neighbor's place.
And how far is that, do you think, from the pipeline?
It would be less than a half a mile because that's a mile section.
Both you and Ms. Marson, before you talked about waterways being different than streams. So I'm gathering that when you talk about a waterway, you mean what I might call a gully?
Maybe.
It's an area where water would flow.
Where it flows naturally, and then you just put grass there as a conservation practice.
Right, okay. That's called a classical gully, I think.
Mm-hmm. Except you want to save your topsoil, so you want to add some grass.
Right. The CRP wetland, that's over.
That's clear to the west of this 2 mile section.
Yeah, okay. And how many acres is that wetland?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know the exact acres because it's kind of hard to see, but the wetlands are in several different spots. Part of it is crop ground and part of it is wetlands, so you'd need to have a much more detailed map from the FSA office to show you exactly where those were. And then it's also hard to tell because, as I stated, OSS Ag has the West 80, and my brother, Eben Salton, and his 2 kids own the East 80. There's no fence line between, so that makes it a little harder to see because he farms both parcels, and so there's no fence between. So it does make it a little bit harder to see exactly from the picture where the cropland is and where the wetlands are, because, like I say, they're divided into multiple pieces.
And that wetland is about how far north of the pipeline?
The pipeline goes through part of the wetlands.
Oh, okay.
On the on this down here, I know there's some wetlands down there, but then there's wetlands farther up too. But where that white line is, there is some wetlands there.
Do you know how Summit intends to go through those wetlands without damaging the wetlands?
No,
Do you think it would damage the wetland?
no, it's not going to help them.
What has the NRCS or the FSA told you, if anything, about the value of those wetlands, or why they were appropriate to be put in CRP?
They were appropriate to put in CRP wetlands as a way to, the soil and the grasses work as a way to, take out nutrients that might otherwise enter the water stream, and it's just a conservation practice that can be a benefit to the environment.
Do you know if those wetlands attract any wildlife?
Yes.
What?
Well, there's pheasants, there's deer, there's normal Iowa wildlife that you find in them. But
You mentioned drainage tile. You have concern about whether the pipeline would impact that drainage tile?
yes,
Why?
although what I've read states that they are going to have an engineer available during construction and have, I believe, county inspectors there as well. I think their intent is good, and I think that they will try to do their best to repair tile along the way. But even professional tilers that we have had do tile work once in a while make mistakes, or once in a while have problems that they are unaware of, or come upon tile that they didn't realize was there. So to say that they could do all this tile work across Iowa and not have any problems, I don't see how that's possible to not have any problems during construction.
You have quite a long stretch of the property that's impacted by the pipeline. Is that all tile?
There is tile in all of that. In each parcel has tile. So there has been work done on all of those parcels.
Okay. Do you believe that you would incur economic damage if the pipeline is installed on your property?
Yes.
Of what kind?
Well, for one, I can't imagine that the land wouldn't be of a lower value there in of itself by having a hazardous CO2 pipeline placed on it. I can't imagine that there will be no tile problems, even with the best of intentions. I think that the odds of having tile broken and damaged during construction, it would likely occur. I also believe compaction is going to be an issue, even though there are processes, I believe, that they intend to have deep tillage done. If this tile, or if this construction were to go through when it was a wet time of year or a wet season, you know, if construction was planned and it kept raining or it didn't dry out in between times, I can't imagine that if we had a spring like '93, that they would just stop. I think compaction issues are a concern. And then also on the land that we have grass for grazing, that is also a concern, that that land be put back in a manner that would allow continued grazing and have grass that is of nutrient value for the cattle. I also have concerns about weeds. I've seen a lot of times, like with the county doing road ditches, how weeds can get to be an issue in a hurry. One of the things that I was reading is that they would have 45 days to deal with a weed issue. if I was reading that correctly, and that might just be for adjacent landowners, but still we have land adjacent to this as well. And if you let weeds grow for 45 days without doing anything about them, that could be an economic issue as well, because that could spread pretty easily. So there are a lot of economic issues that I think would probably arise.
In your opening statement, you indicated that you raise several kinds of crops. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you're not just a corn or soybean farmer.
That's correct. I think diversification is a necessity. I think it's important that we look at all of our opportunities and evaluate what's best for our land.
Do you rotate those crops or what?
We do rotate crops, and as I mentioned, we include alfalfa in our crop rotation, and we do change our pasture paddocks around as well.
Do you believe that your crops would be affected by the pipeline?
Yes.
Why?
Again, I think compaction issues, and depending on what time of year they do it, there are a lot of factors that could harm the soil and the ground for raising crops in the future.
I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde, and Mr. Jorde, I don't think Bold Iowa's coming, so if you don't want to share a microphone with Mr. Taylor, you think you can turn around and grab the other one as well, although Wally seems to be playing nice.
So far, so good.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, take your time.
Ma'am, we've looked a lot at the map up here, but just to quantify, is each of your 7 parcels potentially affected by this pipeline you don't want? Are they each quarter sections, all of them quarter sections?
The parcels are each 40 acres.
Okay.
Right? Is that what you're meaning?
Well, what I couldn't tell from the map, to be sure, because there's red on either side, is each one of the squares, to your understanding, a 40-acre piece?
That was my understanding, yes.
Okay. Because I pulled up some of your individual maps online and the attached Summit survey maps, and it looks like the length going across on most of these is 1,320 foot, which would make them a quarter section. Does that make sense to you? 'Cause, okay, yeah, the quarter section is 4 times as big as a 40-acre piece, right?
Right.
Okay, and it looks like these are all quarter sections, which would mean you have 3.5 miles potentially of this hazardous pipeline you're dealing with. Is that your understanding?
Correct.
All right. Now, you talked a little bit about just now and with Farm Bureau tile repair, and Farm Bureau asked the question of if some damage to tile occurred during construction, would it be your expectation that Summit would pay you? And you said yes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that in the proposed easement that Summit makes you prove to them that any damage you claim was caused during their construction before you can get paid? Did you know that?
No.
And have you been shown any mechanism of how to quantify or calculate damages, or what they determine as your burden of proof, or the amount of documentation you're going to have to assemble before they're satisfied that you have proven to them that their construction caused you tile damage?
No.
Are you aware of any compensation for your time in proving up damages, printing off historical yield maps, combining any types of data, communicating back and forth with Summit? Are you aware if there's any way to recoup your time, assuming you satisfy them and prove your losses?
No, I don't.
How many hours since you very first heard about this potential hazardous pipeline do you estimate you've spent researching, learning, reviewing, and preparing to be here today?
I don't know, but I'm guessing it's not enough.
Okay.
It seems sometimes overwhelming. I don't know how much time I've spent.
Would it be fair to say hundreds of hours in the last
Yes.
2 years? You talked a little bit about insurance. Is it your concern that you will not be able to obtain liability insurance that could cover you in the instance of where allegations are made that damages have occurred due to CO2 exposure?
Yes, and I do have a letter from my insurance company that deals with that, if anybody would like it.
And let me ask you, have you personally, without regard specifically to what that letter may or may not say, but have you personally had the opportunity to draw your own conclusions and come to any opinions as to whether or not your insurance policy would or would not cover these damages?
I can say I'm worried about it.
Okay. And has anyone presented to you the ability to purchase a rider or specific CO2 liability coverage?
No, and in fact, I did ask my insurance agent if there was anything else that we could purchase, and she was gonna look into it and has not found anything as of yet.
Even if there were such type of insurance, and even if you could afford it, do you believe that that is a cost that you as the landowner should have to take on for a project where you get no economic benefits?
No,
In terms of the access easement, would you be surprised to learn that Summit has 24/7 access not only across the easement but across your entire property based on the language in its proposed easement?
it doesn't surprise me.
And in terms of the distances of different structures, I believe you said you estimated it's approximately 500 foot from the current proposed route to your existing 240-foot cattle barn. Is that correct?
That's what it appeared like to me.
Okay. And then you said it was about a quarter mile or 1,320 feet from where your son currently lives, correct?
Or less,
And then you stated that it was approximately a mile or so from where you and your husband currently... Half mile from where you and your husband currently reside.
correct.
And then you understand on quarter sections, which are half mile by half mile, depending how that moves, it could get substantially closer to any or all of those structures.
Correct.
If I asked you to assume that in a worst case leak or rupture of a 24-inch pipeline, that the plume could travel in excess of 4,000 feet, would that concern you?
Yes,
Would it be helpful for you as a member of the public to know the actual data in terms of hazard levels in feet that a plume could travel where CO2 could be contained at toxic levels to you?
yes,
You testified on the smaller white building southwest of where your cattle barn is, that there is a what you call a commodity shed, is that right?
Jesus
Correct.
fucking
Have you ever
Christ.
stored CO2 in that commodity shed?
no.
Okay, nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Unless there are other questions from the parties, we will proceed to board questions, and then we will excuse Ms. Langner. Any other questions from the parties? Okay, so just to clarify, we won't be questioning after the board. Okay, the board have questions?
Sorry, Your Honor.
Oh, there you go, sorry.
I have
Ms.
one, I have one
Yes,
follow-up question for clarification.
sure.
There are 7 on the agenda for today. There's 7 parcels that you are speaking on behalf of.
Correct.
I noticed in the same general area, there's 4 other parcels with folks with the Sultan last name.
Correct.
You're not speaking for those parcels, is that correct?
Donna and Kurt Salton, I am not speaking for them.
So this list of 7 is correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Jorde, did you have a follow-up question?
Not as to that question, no.
Okay.
Oh,
No, it's okay. Just making sure. Okay. Board Member Burns?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Langer. If we could just go back to the map, if we could zoom in on, I believe it's parcel 072, or where the hand was. If you stay where the hand was and we zoom in on that parcel. So just to clarify, I understand where the cattle shed is, the commodities building. What is that structure that has, if you go up, it's in the red shaded area? It looks like maybe a tree line. What is that area right there?
I believe that is a movable, bottomless bunk.
So is that kind of an open lot
No,
area?
it's just a bottomless bunk is what we feed silage in, and it just happens to be there in that picture, so it's movable.
Gotcha, thank you. And then if we go to the right, the smaller parcel, keep going. What is underneath that red layer? It looks like two square boxes on top of each other. Yep, you're on it, whoever's controlling the mouse.
That would be the next parcel over, that would be another owner's,
Okay, so that's not yours.
no.
Okay, thank you, we won't bring that one up then.
Come on, guys, you know what this shit is.
Just want to clarify, it sounds like there was a conversation with Summit on a voluntary easement. Is that true or not true?
I met with a Summit land agent initially in this process. I know it was before April of 2021 because I took information. My family has regularly scheduled business meetings, and I remember taking that information to our April meeting to present it to them, because it's not just up to me whether we sign these easement agreements or not. And I know before that, I wanted to just gather information to share, to see what other people thought, instead of it just being me making that decision.
So to be clear for the record, you were provided an actual easement, and I don't need to know dollar amounts, that had a dollar amount attached to it for voluntary easements for your property, correct?
Correct. And they said it was a sample easement, that it had dollar amounts for all parcels.
Okay, all right. I don't believe I have anything else. And Mr. Taylor, I appreciate your correction on the earlier individual on the hazardous liquid pipeline. We're talking about an unrefined product and a refined product, so thank you for clarifying that in the record. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Ms. Langer? Thank you. We appreciate your patience. You're excused.
Thank you.
Okay,